good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, context is everything media network. Founder and CEO, John Michael, is reading a textbook, cover to cover. Today, the new ways of thinking in the Industrial Revolution in England. Yesterday, something about there was a labor strike guy who was saying these machines are taking over. And his name was Ludd, and he was a mythical figure. Check it out. Chapter 20, Section 4, New Ways of Thinking. Setting the scene. Everywhere but in Britain, Thomas Malthus saw the effects of the population explosion. Crowded slums, hungry families, unemployment, and widespread misery. After careful study in 1798, he published his essay on the principle of population. Poverty and misery, he concluded, were unavoidable because the population was increasing faster than the food supply. Malthus wrote, "All power of population is far greater than the power of the earth to produce substance for man. The power of population is far greater than the power of the earth to produce substance for man." Malthus was one of many thinkers who tried to understand the staggering changes taking place in the early industrial age. As heirs to the Enlightenment, these thinkers looked for natural laws that governed the world of business and economics. I wonder what they're going to conclude. Laissez-faire economy. Laissez-faire economics. Heading. During the Enlightenment, physiocrats argued that natural laws should be allowed to operate without interference. Physiocrat. Physiocrats. As part of the philosophy, they believed that government should not interfere in free operation of the economy. In the early 1800s, middle-class business leaders embraced this laissez-faire or hands-off approach. Hands-off. Legacy of Adam Smith. Who's Adam Smith? We haven't talked about him yet. Oh, there's Adam Smith on the side panel here. Adam Smith. If anyone fit the image of the absent-minded professor, it was Adam Smith. He forgot things, spoke awkwardly, and rambled as he walked. "I am a beau in nothing but my books," Smith once said. Still, he had one of history's keenest minds. At the age of 14, Smith was a student at a university in his native Scotland. There and later in Paris, he met many influential thinkers of the Enlightenment. He also met local merchants, gaining practical knowledge about business. Smith spent 10 years writing The Wealth of Nations. Published in 1776, it became an instant bestseller. Readers embraced Smith's ideas about laissez-faire and the benefits of capitalism. Smith asserted that a free market, the unregulated change of goods and services, would come to help everyone, not just the rich, is what he said. The free market, Smith said, would produce more goods at lower prices, making them affordable by everyone. A growing economy would also encourage capitalists to reinvest profits in new ventures. Supporters of free enterprise capitalism pointed out the successes of the industrial age, in which government had played no part. Malthus on population. Why do we go Malthus and... Okay. Malthus on population. In Smith's book, Thomas Malthus's writings on population shaped like Smith's book, Thomas Malthus's thoughts on population shaped economic thinking for generations. Malthus grimly predicted that population would outpace the food supply. The once checks The only checks on population growth, he said, were war, disease, and famine. As long as population kept increasing, he went on, the poor would suffer. He thus urged families to have fewer children. During the early 1800s, many people accepted Malthus's bleak view. It proved to be too pessimistic, however. Although the population boom did continue, the food supply grew even faster. As the century progressed, living conditions in the Western world also slowly improved. And then people began having fewer children. By the 1900s, population growth was no longer a problem in the West, but it did continue to afflict many nations elsewhere. Ricardo on wages. Another influential British economist, David Ricardo, would agree with Malthus that the poor had too many children. In his Iron Law of Wages, Ricardo pointed out that when wages were high, families had more children, but more children meant greater supply of labor, which led to lower wages and higher unemployment. Like Malthus, Ricardo did not hold out hope for the working class to escape poverty. Because of such gloomy predictions, economics became known as a dismal science. Neither Malthus nor Ricardo was a cruel man. How do we know? Yet both opposed any government help for the poor. To these supporters of the laissez-faire economics, the best cure for poverty was not government relief, but the unrestricted laws of the free market. They felt that individuals should be left to improve their lot through thrift, hard work, and limiting the size of their family. The Utilitarians. New heading. Others adapted laissez-faire doctrines to justify some government interventions. By the 1800s, Jeremy Bentham was preaching utilitarianism, the idea that the goal of society should be the greatest happiness for the greatest number of its citizens. To Bentham, all laws or actions should be judged by their utility. Did they provide more pleasure than pain? He strongly supported individual freedom, which he believed guaranteed happiness. Still, he saw the need for government to become involved under certain circumstances. Bentham's chief follower, John Stuart Mill, also argued that actions are right if they promote happiness and wrong if they cause pain. He re-examined the idea that unrestricted competition in the free market was always good. Often, he said, it favored the strong over the weak. Although he believed strongly in individual freedom, Mill wanted the government to step in to improve the hard lives of the working class. The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any number of civilized community against his will. What? The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will, Mill wrote, is to prevent harm from others. I'm reading poorly, sorry. The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant. The middle class business and factory owners were entitled to increase their own happiness, therefore government should prevent them from doing so in a manner that harmed workers. Mill further called for giving the vote to workers and women. These groups could then use their political power to win reforms. Utilitarians also worked for reforms in many other areas affecting workers and the poor. From child labor to public health, most middle-class people rejected Mill's ideas. Only later in 1880s, or rather only later in the 1800s, were his views slowly accepted. Today's democratic governments, however, have absorbed many ideas from Mill and the other utilitarians. Emergence of Socialism. While the champions of laissez-faire economics praised individual rights, other thinkers focused on the good of society in general. They condemned the evils of industrial capitalism, which they believed had created a gulf between rich and poor. To end poverty and injustice, they offered a radical solution: socialism. Under socialism, the people as a whole, rather than private individuals, would own and operate the means of production. The farms, factories, railways, and other large businesses that produced and distributed goods. Socialism grew out of the Enlightenment faith in progress, its belief in the basic goodness of human nature, and its concern for social justice. Socialists wanted to develop a world in which society would operate for the benefit of all members, rather than just for the wealthy. In the socialist society, one reformer predicted, "There will be no war, no crime, no administration of justice, as it is called, no government. Besides, there will be neither disease, anguish, melancholy, nor resentment. Every man will seek the good of all." William Godwin, Political Justice. Well, if that were the case, it would make sense. If there was no government, except for very small communities, and the socialist ideas were upheld in those very small communities, it's a great idea. But that's not ever going to happen in the United States unless there's a cataclysm where everything's wiped out. So it's a bad idea for us. Because, as one of the originators of the idea says, no government. When there's government in socialism, the government will be corrupt. Please disagree with me in the comments below. I'm trying to engage conversation. Inflammatory conversation. Please disagree with me. The Utopians. Early socialists tried to build self-sufficient communities in which all work was shared and all property was owned in common. When there was no difference between rich and poor, they felt fighting between people would disappear. These early socialists were called utopians, after Thomas More's ideal community. The name implied that they were impractical dreamers. However, the utopian Robert Owen did set up a model community to put his ideas into practice. Robert Owen. A poor Welsh boy, Owen became a successful mill owner. Unlike most industrialists at the time, he refused to use child labor. He campaigned vigorously for laws that limited child labor and encouraged the organization of labor unions. Owen insisted that the conditions in which people lived shaped their character. To prove this point, he set up his factory in New Lanark, Scotland, as a model village. He built homes for workers, opened a school for children, and generally treated employees well. He showed them that an employer could offer decent living and working conditions and still run a profitable business. By 1820s, many people were visiting New Lanark to study Owen's reforms. Tell me more. What happened? That sounds interesting. Why is it done? Why is that section done? That sounds interesting. Tell me more. Was it good? Did it work? I don't know. I'm interested. Robert Owen. Robert Owen, a lovely footballer in his own right. The scientific socialism of Karl Marx. In the 1840s, Karl Marx, a German philosopher, condemned the idea that utopians as unrealistic idealists. He put forward a new theory, scientific socialism, which he claimed was based on scientific study of history. As a young man in Germany, Marx agitated for reform. That's what it says, agitated for reform. Forced to leave his homeland because of his radical ideas, he lived first in Paris, then settled in London. He teamed up with another German socialist, Friedrich Engels, whose father owned a textile factory in England. Marx and Engels wrote a pamphlet, the Communist Manifesto, which they published in 1848. A spectre is haunting Europe, it began. The spectre of communism. Communism is a form of socialism that sees class struggle between employers and employees as unavoidable. Marxism. The Communist Manifesto. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx theorized that economics was the driving force in history. The entire course of history, he argued, was the history of the class struggles between the haves and the have-nots. The haves have always owned the means of production and thus controlled society and all its wealth. The industrialized Europe, Marx said, the haves are the bourgeoisie. The have-nots were the proletariat, or the working class. According to Marx, the modern class struggle pitted the bourgeoisie against the proletariat. In the end, he predicted the proletariat would be triumphant. It would then take control of the means of production and set up a classless communist society. Such a society would mark the end of the struggle between struggles people had endured throughout history, because wealth and power would be equally shared. Marx despised capitalism. He believed it created prosperity for only a few and poverty for many. He called it an international struggle to bring about its downfall. Working men for all countries, he urged. Unite! Is he wrong? Well, he was wrong about his ideas working, but in theory, capitalism does favor the top few. Not wrong about that. Looking ahead, and this will be the end of our time together today. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that if you're still here, that you leave a subscribe and that you leave a like, because that would be wonderful. And it's free. Thank you. John Michael, Context is Everything Media Network, episode 107. Page 513 of 1007. We're getting there. Looking ahead. At first, Marxism gained popularity with many people around the world. Leaders of a number of reform movements adopted an idea that power should be held by workers rather than by business owners. Marx's ideas would never be practiced exactly as he imagined them, however. Failures as time passed, failures of Marxist governments would illustrate the flaws in his arguments. Marx claimed that his ideas were based on scientific laws. However, many of the assumptions on which he based his theories were wrong. He predicted that the misery of the proletariat would touch off... What? He predicted that the miseries of the proletariat would touch off a world revolution. Weird wording. Touch off. Instead, by 1900, the efforts of reform and government led to improved conditions for working class. As a result, Marxism lost some of its appeal in the industrially developed countries of Europe and North America. Marx also predicted that the workers would unite across national borders to wage class warfare. Instead, nationalism won out over working class loyalty. In general, people felt stronger ties to their own countries than the international communist movement. Revolutions. These failures did not doom the movement instantly. In the late 1800s, Russian socialists embraced Marxism, and the Russian Revolution in 1917 set up a communist-inspired government. For much of the 1900s, revolutionaries around the world would adapt Marxist ideas in their own needs. Independence leaders in Asia, Latin America, and Africa would turn to Marxism. By the 1990s, however, nearly every nation would incorporate elements of free market capitalism. To many people, Adam Smith's ideas seem to be more lasting than those of Karl Marx. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope that you enjoy the weather. I hope that if it is warm out, you get a tan. If it's sunny, that you let the vitamin D enter your pores, or however it does. Bye-bye. God bless. Which hand am I going to use? I'm going to use this one. Okay. Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. Goodbye.